welcome back to the Liberty Insider. Before the break, you saw a video with an interview with the gentleman from the Middle East, from Egypt, and my guest. You're not from Egypt. You're not from the Middle East.
No.
Good old USA, but we see the worldwide events, and Andy. I'd like to talk a little bit further about how we can address this as Christians and as Westerners, because I believe that there is a real conflict, a clash of civilizations and different religions that come with it. Mm-hmm. So you can't just sort of wish the thing away or will it away by tolerance. There's something heavy going on. Mm-hmm. But as you said about France, perhaps they were overzealous in restricting something that in itself was pretty harmless. Mm-hmm. But the facts are that they knew what it represented. This was sort of the camel's nose in the tent flap on a larger issue. Do you agree with that?
I would, yes, absolutely. I think, of course, the issue has to do with one's fundamental right or the freedom of one's conscience to carry out their conviction. And I think any laws, especially that French law, in about 30 cities, I know it's been overruled in some of them, but I do think that infringes on a person to carry out their religious conviction, and I would oppose that.
Yes, and this is the catch. You have to have neutrality toward religious practice. Mm-hmm. Religious liberty works for all or it works for none. Once you start carving off, and in the United States, ironically, with the President Bush's faith-based initiative, they were very quickly on the way to doing that. I remember talking to one of their representatives for the faith-based initiative in the Justice Department, and I said, you're funneling all this money, government money, through to the churches. You clearly have a process of vetting who gets the money or not. Mm-hmm. So after a while, you have a list of churches you trust and churches you don't. Yeah. And that's a very bad way for the government to act. They should be out of the church business and allow all churches to operate. And if any church or Christian or any faith person in practicing their faith does something that harms their fellow citizens or something dangerous, illegal, violent, or whatever, they should be punished under the law like anyone else. Mm-hmm. No hesitation. Mm-hmm. But don't mess with their religious practice per se. Mm-hmm. And this is the danger of the French thing. I agree with you. Yeah. It's not good that they've chosen to restrict this particular religious practice. They're doing it in the name of secularity, but they could just as easily say you're not allowed to pray in public.
That's right.
You don't want that. You see someone bowing their head, fine.
Yes.
I mean, they're not about to do that, but in theory they could, or if there was a change of administration.
Yeah. What we're seeing in society is a conflict of competing worldviews, whether it be Islam, whether it be Christianity, whether it be secularism. And I sincerely believe that we're reaching a stage in this Earth's history where there really is no solution, and the ante is being pushed, or the envelope is being pushed further and further to a point where these conflicts are going to be increasingly more. We're going to see them on a wider scale more frequently.
Yeah.
And that's troubling. And having said that, ultimately the ultimate solution will be the second coming of Jesus, and it behooves us as Christians to really work that much harder, not in political or social activism, but in again, taking the gospel message to the world.
Right. As far as religious liberty, way too many of my fellow Seventh Adventist Christians say, citing what you just said, well, this we know it's not going to end. We know that Jesus coming is the only solution. Mm-hmm. And we know that there will even be harassment, persecution of certain religious groups. So let it come. Let's have it. Why fight it? Let's just go through. And I think that is misunderstanding the whole dynamic. And you're
Yes.
not saying that we should just
No,
fold our
absolutely.
hands and say, let it come.
Absolutely not, because that would be irresponsible for me as a Christian to just say, you know what, Jesus is going to come anyway, so let things roll as they are. No, Jesus gave us the responsibility to stand up for the poor, the afflicted, and the abused, and the victims of society. And so I think we need to play an active role in terms of helping and assisting those in need.
Whenever we can. At the same time, our eyes should be set plainly toward that second coming and gathering other people to be with us.
That's right.
And of course, along with that, we have to deal with other religions. We have to be charitable toward other people. We would defend religious liberty because it enables what we're doing as well as protects the inherent God-given rights of other people, right?
That's right. That's right.
But this thing in France, and France is not the only country, I think is important because I don't think in the US they quite understand what's happened to France and Germany. There have been so many migrant workers come in and so many emigres from the once colonial outposts that in parts of Paris, I remember a few years ago, I drove from one side of Paris to the other. It was a mistake of the GPS. Rather than specifying shortest, I specified most direct. So I drove from one side of Paris to the other, street by street. And I can tell you there are whole stretches of miles upon mile. You think you're in Central Africa, and not a nice part of Central Africa.
Yeah.
There are burned and abandoned cars everywhere, gutted buildings, decrepit buildings with people milling around them. They are on the verge of losing social control over parts of their own country. That would be bad, period. But then when you throw in an intractable religious element that refuses to not only to assimilate, but is an antagonistic toward both the secularism and the religion of France. They've got a problem that I'm sure that the secular leaders are just wringing their hands. They don't know the answer to it. Their very identity as a country is at stake. And you can say the same for Germany. And I understand a lot of this from seeing it, but the only thing I freely admit I don't understand is who opened the gates last year and let those hundreds of thousands of people flood into Europe. There's a plan somewhere, and I don't even know what the end point is, but it's easier to see what it's creating. It's social conflict and religious conflict on an unimaginable scale.
And I do believe these issues are too complex for you and I to even attempt to solve them.
No, but we need to discuss it because it's very important. These are acting as trigger environments for some very untoward religious liberty situations.
That's right. And ultimately, they're going. I mean, it's being discussed in our country what to do with the refugees in Syria and other countries, and some of our presidential candidates have very specific views on that. But you know, for me, as a Christian, I don't believe it's my responsibility to engage that debate in terms of policy and the politics of it, but what I do believe is a theological, biblical matter is how I am to treat and perceive those of faith communities that differ from my own. And I don't believe we should be branding them or articulating how they're enemies and using pejorative language to describe any group of people, because ultimately we want to win them to Christianity.
Well, and this is the reality anyhow in France and in the US. It's unlikely that enough buses could be got together to ship all of these people somewhere else. When you're dealing with tens of millions of people It's the reality. So somehow society, short of the second coming of Christ, needs to minimize these conflicts. And you're right. The principles of Christian charity, the overarching principle of religious liberty, and the right of all people to believe as they believe and not to compel me to believe as they believe, which is part of it. So no compulsion in religion. That principle needs to be applied, and it's the only way toward a semi-peaceful or a peaceful society.
Absolutely.
We are, I love history, and there's no question we're at a break point of history where even the nation states that date back to just after Martin Luther and the 30 Years' War in Europe. States are breaking down, societies are breaking down, religion is erupting in violent ways, and something needs to be done.
Absolutely. And one thing that I want to highlight as we close is that we need to be very careful that we as Christians do not take on the viewpoints of news commentators, of social media in terms of how we view others, but we need to have the Bible inform how we view others in other faiths.
Modesty obviously has its limits, and certain religious dress, such as the full burqa, may have revealed them. But it's worth remembering that in the Victorian era and other times in Western society, poems were written, many men were driven to distraction by the sight of a few inches of ankle. We should be, of course, understanding of religious sensibilities that, after all, are aiming at the same respect and honour toward God that Christians and others would want in their behaviour, that we see in this case, Muslim dress. The Seventh-day Adventist Church's Religious Liberty Department has been careful to help this concern. I know in Oregon, we were one of the main proponents of a religious dress bill that definitely advanced the principle of freedom for religious dress of all faiths. But we must never think that this is something that we can dismiss out of hand just because the social norm flies against it. Religion is not to be equated with social norms. For Liberty Insider, this is Lincoln Steed.